Hello, everyone. Hello, Ellie.
Hello.
How are you, Ellie?
I'm good, thanks. As you can see, I still have no internet at home, so I am in the church office as per. It's been a long time, guys. It's been a long time.
Having no internet right now is the literal worst.
I know.
So dependent. Well done, mate. You're doing well. You're doing
Thank
well.
you, thank you.
Anyway, welcome back, everyone, to Genesis Questions. It's been a while since we did one of these, which is partly because we have been kind of gathering your questions. It's been really interesting. There have been lots of similar questions on similar themes. So some of what we're going to say today is kind of recapping some stuff we said before. But we wanted to answer as many of your questions as we could. So hopefully this does a bit of a job of that. And my encouragement to you guys is keep asking. If we haven't answered your question directly, send me an email, and we would love to answer it on email or on Zoom small groups or wherever. Yeah, let's get cracking, shall we, Ellie?
Yes, let's go.
Great. Our first question is, did Adam and Eve really exist? This is a big question. We've had it in lots of different ways. And I think it's partly because we've been saying, like, as we've been doing this series, Origins and Endings, we've been saying Genesis is a kind of parable, a kind of story that explains things rather than like a history or a science textbook. But then when we say that, it's a bit confusing, right? Like, did Adam and Eve actually exist or not? And I think it's important to say different Christians think different things about this question. Ellie, you've been doing a bit of kind of research
Yeah.
some of the different ways of understanding it. What have you discovered?
Yeah. So there's loads of different readings of the Genesis story. Some people read it and they think that Adam and Eve were real historical people who actually existed, and that the story of the Garden of Eden, that is a story that is important, that it's true. And one of the main things that they get this reading from is the fact that there's loads of, in the Bible, loads of genealogies where they list everyone's descendants, and every time they list them all back to Adam and Eve at the start. And for some people, this is like a really important thing that they think, like, yeah, this is true, because they think that it's just important for it to be literal. But there's also loads of other readings of it as well. And one of those, Steve, this is probably going to be more on your side of the argument, is that this is a parable. It's not a real historical thing that actually happened, but it's a story that is nonetheless tells us really true things. So over to Steve for this reading.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I've actually changed my mind in my life. Like I used to think that Adam and Eve definitely were real, and now I think maybe they weren't. But I'm kind of open, and I think maybe it's important to say, like, it's not, for me, it's not one of the like central core issues about whether or not I'm a Christian. Like, if I find out they are or aren't real, it's not going to change whether I'm a Christian. It seems to me that there are some bits of the Bible where it really matters if they're real. Like the gospel stories about Jesus. I think it really matters if they're historically true or not, because they say this is a historical account, basically, or like a biography. But Genesis 1-3, it doesn't kind of say that, and I think it's presented more as a kind of, this is a story that we're supposed to learn from, and almost to the extent that it doesn't completely matter whether or not it's literally true. Like, the points that you get from it, and actually this is true for different kinds of Christians, whether you think it's literally true or not, the points that you get from it are often the same, about how God made everything, about how humans were put into this world in the image of God, about how people have chosen their own version of good and evil rather than God's version, and things like that. So yeah, that's my answer. I don't completely know. I think it's a parable and we're supposed to learn from it, like big picture things. But there are different ways of reading it, and I don't think it's like one of the core questions. Whether Jesus exists and whether he rose from the dead, that's a much bigger question, and that would be one that would be really worth finding out. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it sounds good. I think it's kind of like when you read different books, you'd expect different things. If you read a science book, you'd be expecting that it's got like diagrams and it's like true, and you can like do a test and find out whether it's real or not. Whereas if you're reading a storybook, you'd expect it maybe not to be literally true, but you'd expect to get stuff out of it that is still true and good about the world. So I suppose it's that kind of difference, isn't it? Different texts are written for different reasons. and Genesis is maybe written more as a parable than a scientific, like, this is true.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that's different about it, I know we're spending a lot of time on this question, but it's a big question. One of the things that's different is, Jesus quotes from this story. Jesus talks about this story, and so does Paul and lots of the other disciples. And they see it as a story that was inspired by God. And that's one of the things, I guess, that's different about the Bible, where it's not necessarily trying to be literally true. I still believe, because I think Jesus believed, that it is inspired by God, that it's like it's not just a fable, like a kind of Aesop's fable. I used to love Aesop's fables when I was a kid. I had like a little book and everything. But it's not just a fable, like a nice story. Actually, it's inspired by God to teach us something that we need to know. So yeah, I kind of would add that. All right, let's move on. I'm sure people still have questions about that, but we'll just crack on, and you can let us know, friends, if you still do. Second question we had: if we believe that evolution is part of God's creation plan, and therefore that we evolved from apes, when did we get souls?
Oh, good question. Yeah, so there's actually a Bible Project video about this that is brilliant. Would highly recommend. We will attach the link to this somehow. But would highly recommend that. Watch that. It's brilliant. We're not going to completely reenact the whole thing, because not only would that be plagiarism, but also we're just not as good. But here's a little bit of a summary of it. So basically, this video talks about what does the Bible actually mean by soul? Because I think a lot of us, when we have an idea of soul, we think of, like, we have our body, and then we've got like this little floating soul thing. Do a little floating soul dance, Thanks, Steve. That's what's separate to our body. And this is actually not what the Bible is talking about when it talks about a soul. This is kind of a Greek philosophy idea. But when the Bible's talking about the soul, it's talking about the whole being, like all of you. That's what it means. It's not something you can disconnect from your physical body. The soul isn't like something that flies away and you're still, they are two, that is the same thing. You have no soul apart from your whole self. And so when we think about the soul this way, it's not something that kind of God sort of put into human beings at some point down the evolutionary chain. It's not like he sort of, posted it in. It's just, that is, our soul is our entire self. But this kind of leads on to the bigger question then that I think is behind this one, of what is actually different between animals and humans then? Where is the distinction between the two? And Steve's thought a bit more about that, so I'll hand over.
Yeah, and we talked a bit about this in one of our earlier episodes, but the Genesis, humans are still animals. And like, sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we like to think that we're like different or more than animals. We're still animals. Like, it's important to remember that. And like, it means that science and biology and like, they're really important things to study, because they can explain an awful lot about us and the way we behave. And the thing that Genesis says is different about humans is that they're made in the image of God. And that doesn't seem to be like, what it seems to mean is that humans are given responsibility to look after and to care for and to rule the world on God's behalf, which doesn't necessarily mean there's something different, like biologically, but it means that we have a different role to play, and like a different way of relating to God, which you can kind of, I don't know if this is like a random thought, but humans are some of the most intelligent species on the planet. And so that kind of makes sense, right? Like, that God would give the most intelligent species the role of looking after and caring for everything else. That's probably too biological a way of looking at it. But I think, spiritually and kind of in the Bible, the thing that sets us apart is not necessarily having a soul, but more the responsibility that God has given us, and also the way that he rescues us from the times when we don't do that responsibility properly. Does that make sense, Ellie?
Yeah. I mean, it could have been otters or dolphins that were the humans instead, because they are really clever too. Like, dolphins could have a whole like empire. This is the thing. Sorry, gone down conspiracy theory route. Not time for this. Okay, next question.
That was such a random thought, Ellie. Anyway, I mean, also Jesus came as a human, which is interesting. And
I think an otter or a dolphin.
Not as an otter or a dolphin.
Right, sorry. That's all of the...
And I think that also links back to the image of God. Jesus came as the true image, the one who perfectly represents what God is like. well, yeah, in a created world way represents what God is like. And that says something about who we are as well, that we have that ability to represent, to image God. And none of us do that perfectly, but Jesus did it perfectly as a human can do, represented what God is like. But we have that potential inside us as part of how we're made. Okay, there was some rambling thoughts. This is a much more rambling thoughts episode, but maybe that's helpful. I really hope it is. If you're watching this, well done. Third question then for today. Genesis 3 verse 1 says that God made the serpent. Why would he do that when he knew what was going to happen?
Oh, very good question. I've thought about that a lot. I always wonder that in the story.
It's a great question. I mean, one of the things about Genesis 1 to 3 is sometimes it looks like, well, it does look like God has kind of set everything up to fail. Like it looks like all along, right from the beginning, how is this ever not going to happen? Like it, and I have to admit, it's one of the reasons why I read it as a parable, because I don't think it was like God set up this world to fail. I think it's explaining, hey, look, this is what's already happening. So the person writing Genesis is looking around at the world and seeing, hey, look, people get tempted, people do wrong, people aren't what they're supposed to be. And God inspired this story kind of out of that place of observing the world. So it's like, it's a way of explaining how the world is. But a couple of interesting things about the serpent in the story. The first one is that the serpent is made by God. It talks about, Genesis 3:1 talks about the serpent among all the creatures that God has made. But the other thing is that it's clearly not just a snake. Like, it talks, for starters. And elsewhere in the Bible, we see that the serpent becomes this image of like evil, spiritual evil, what gets called elsewhere in the Bible, the Satan or the devil or the evil one. And the picture that gets painted actually is that this serpent, devil, evil one, like has also fallen, has also kind of chosen to rebel against God. It's kind of unclear from the Bible, but it may have been like an angel or a spiritual being that chose to kind of reject God and go a different way. But I guess the question still remains, even if that's all true, the question still remains, well, why would God let this happen? Like, even if it is just that good things that God made rebelled against him, why would God allow that to happen? Ellie, what do you think?
Yeah, oh, well, I actually don't have a proper answer to this. Strangely enough, it's quite a big question. Yeah, so I think this is obviously a huge question that all of us probably asked at some point. They're like, why, God, do you let evil happen? And I think this is a question that we don't have a great wrapped up in a box answer for. We've just got a few thoughts that come from reading the Bible and looking at Jesus' life. And I think actually one of the biggest ones is actually when God gives us choice, the element of choice and decision and freedom to make our own choices. Part of that does involve evil in the world, because that is the only way for love, real love, as we like love as a choice, to exist in the world. There has to be the choice to be able to choose wrong as well. That's one vague thought. There's loads of other thoughts about it. But I think the key issue here when we're asking this question is we don't ask it normally just as like an intellectual exercise for fun. When we ask this question, we normally ask it because we've experienced bad things, or we have people we care about who we've lost, or we've seen the world and it's sad and angry when we see what goes on. And that's completely fair. And actually the thing we learn from the Bible is that is what God feels like when he looks at the world. He doesn't see it and go, oh, well, we'll just let that happen. It breaks his heart. And he doesn't just stand by and watch it and feel a bit sad. God actually actively does something about it. And whatever his reasons were for making a world like this, he came into it as a human, and he lived a difficult life, a really hard life. He lived a life as a refugee, as a poor man who never had large amounts of friends. He wasn't successful, he wasn't popular, and then he suffered and died on the cross, which is crucifixion. Is not a fun way to die. I mean, there's not any fun ways to die, but that is a terrible way to die. It's involving death by asphyxiation, can't even say it. And he lived a life of suffering, and so I think, and he did all of that for us so that we could be with God. And I think for me that is a sort of emotionally satisfying answer to this question in a way, because I know that whatever God's reasons were, he has borne it all on himself. He's carried it all on himself, and he did it for us, and we don't have to ever go through any of it alone. And so I think that's kind of the Bible's ultimate answer to suffering, is the suffering man. It's Jesus on the cross, like bearing the weight of all the evil in the world on himself. God takes it on himself. And I think that's what the Bible offers as an answer to suffering. Yes, those are some thoughts on that. Anything to add, Steve?
Oh, mate, that's so good. I was just listening to you being like, that's really what we want to say, isn't it? Like at the end of the day, it points us forward to Jesus. And God doesn't just allow evil on the earth. Like he allowed evil on himself. He like subjected himself to it so that he could rescue us, so that he could show us how much he loves us, so that we have hope. That's awesome. That's Jesus. That's amazing. Thank you, Ellie. Those are all the questions we have for now. I hope this has been helpful. It's been a slightly more rambly Genesis questions than usual, but it's because we wanted to show you a bit more of our working, I guess, behind some of these things that we've talked a bit about before. But if you have more questions, please get in touch, send us an email or whatever. It would be great to kind of hear what you think. Otherwise, we're going to do some ending questions as we go into the second half of our series, so you can also post them. But for now, farewell from us. Have a good rest of the week. Bye.